Hello, everyone. This is Keith Perrin. I am the CEO of Court Square Group, and this is the Driving the Business of Science podcast. Today we have with us Mark Connell, the COO of SLBST Pharma Inc. So I want to make sure I get it right. So I just asked Mark, how do we pronounce it the right way? So SLBST. And he's going to give us an introduction to what SLBST is all about and what they do and how they do things. But let me talk a little bit first about this podcast. We put this podcast in place because I think a lot of people think that when you develop new drugs, it's all just about the scientists doing work. But there's a lot of business aspects behind getting a drug to market, getting it to that point where it can actually be something that gets into humans. So I wanted to introduce everybody to all the different aspects of the drug development life cycle and what happens there. And by talking with different people that we work with or meet in our daily lives, it's a great way to do that through this podcast. Court Square Group is a managed service firm. We manage IT infrastructure for life science companies, pharmaceutical, biotech, med device, all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. We also have a system called RegDocs 365, which is a content repository that started out with just a TMF and EDM reference model to host clinical trial data or submission data when you're going to submit to the regulatory authorities. What we found is that a lot of our companies needed an area to start with, and we call it Life Science Launchpad. It's a way to start up a company. It's a pre-configured departmental folder structure with a governance plan that allows you to get things going. It has a quality system. It's got an e-room with it. So most of these starting companies just need something to start with, and that's what we wanted to bring to market. So today we have with us Mark Connell, the COO of SLBST, and I'm going to let Mark introduce himself and talk a little bit about SLBST, and then we'll talk a little bit about the whole startup world. Mark.
Great. Keith, thanks so much. It's great to be here and great to have an opportunity to talk for a bit. One correction, I am a co-founder and the president of SLBST Pharma. SLBST Pharma, we are repurposing an existing drug to treat endometriosis, which affects a huge number of patients. It's very broadly prevalent. There roughly 1 in 10 women suffer from endometriosis. So 1 in 10 women, that represents roughly 7 million women in the US. So hugely prevalent, but there are very few therapies for it. So there are a handful of medical therapies. They're all hormonal. None are particularly effective. There's some newer therapies that have come in, but none of those have really taken hold. The alternative is there's surgery. Surgery, we like to say, it's a treatment, not a cure. So the majority of women who get surgery for endometriosis end up coming back for multiple surgeries. So it can help at a certain point in time, but it doesn't solve the problem for all time. So a huge problem. We've got a novel take on this. So our inventor's a scientist who was working down at University of South Florida. She had an intuition, a hypothesis that she thought that the process of autophagy played a significant role in the etiology of endometriosis. So she began looking at drugs that inhibited autophagy and came upon the drug we're using, which I'm sure most people will know the name. The drug is hydroxychloroquine. So this was all back in 2012, 2014 when she first began running experiments. She was very successful. What she found was a 60% reduction in the number of lesions in an animal model. So that discovery, the fact that hydroxychloroquine was able to exert a disease modification in this difficult to treat disease was stunning. So the university filed patents. We came in shortly after, licensed those patents while they were simply patent applications. And since 2021, the US patent issued in 2021, we've been moving it forward. So we've been at this point, been to FDA twice with a pre-IND consultation. And FDA has said, look, this drug, well known, used for decades. We have no safety issues. We'll let you proceed to the next step by moving into phase 2 with a dose finding study. So we've been able to, with a very clever scientist providing an interesting idea, we've been able to move things along to the point where we're raising funding to run a phase 2 clinical trial.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit, I really apologize about getting the title wrong there.
Ah,
But
not
well, that's the glory of these kind of things. We get to talk, we try to be very conversational here and just go back and forth on what's there. Before we started this, Mark and I were just talking a little bit about the name of the company, SLBST. Can you talk a little bit about that and where you guys came from, where you got that name?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every biotech has its own naming story. It's all part of the heritage of the company, and ours comes from, I mentioned earlier, the method of action that our inventors started with was autophagy. We've got three members of our founding team. We've got a scientist, Beat Wiedemann. Beat is a Swiss national, ran preclinical research at Novartis for several different therapeutic areas. Beat said, "Oh, autophagy in German, that would be Selbstessen." So we took the German word Selbst, Selbst. Sorry, my German spelling's not particularly good. We took the German word Selbst, removed the E so that we could we could get the website domain for it, and that's where it comes from.
Fantastic. It's interesting to see where everybody gets their names from. Um, so that's interesting. One of the things I want to ask you is, how did you get involved in life science in general as a co-founder and setting up this? I mean, did you know anybody in South Florida when you did it, or did you were already involved with a couple other people? How did it come about?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so the original, so I mentioned Beat Wiedemann, who's our chief science officer. Our the third founder is Dan Kim. Dan was a director of new product commercialization at Novartis. So Dan and Beat had known one another for 15, 20 years ultimately. They'd worked together at Novartis. It was Dan was a consultant, was working on another project, was down at USF talking with the technology transfer group, and he asked the question, "What else do you have? Do you have anything interesting?" And they said, "Well, we've just filed a patent on this interesting new idea." So that was how Cellbest originated. I came along I came along in 21, and it was a mutual friend introduced me to both Dan and Beat. The US patent had recently issued, and my first response was, "Oh my God, what do you mean the US patent issued?" As soon as the patent's issued, time is burning. Every month we're not in the market with this, we're losing money that we can't ever get back. So we need to get organized, get into FDA, get ourselves on track so that we can move this forward. So it was like so many things in this industry, it was a question of having the right friends, being open to conversations, and and when you find the right people to move forward with, joining forces and moving forward together.
It's funny because people think that this industry is so huge, and it is. I mean, there's lots of people in this industry, but the reality is sometimes it comes down to those people from past lives, other places you've worked, all those things, and those relationships are hugely important for trying to put things together.
Yeah,
What does
yeah,
it take to really get?
well, and I'd say so. We're fortunate. We've got this great balance. We've got Beat with super strong decades of drug development experience. Dan super strong in the commercialization, product management world, and I'm bringing in the business and operational aspect. So, kind of that trio. We're reinforcing, we're balancing one another's talents out. So as a team, we're covering all the bases.
Well, it's funny because I think that I met you at it was a beer and biotech event out in the Cambridge area. And when Mark and I started talking to each other, we introduced ourselves. Um, we talked a little bit about the whole concept that he was the business aspect of their business. And I said, well, I happen to run a business, a podcast that talks about, driving the business of science. I thought it'd be great. So we're lucky enough to have Mark say yes and be on the thing. So let's talk a little bit more about that business aspect and what does it take to really get a startup off the ground the way you've been doing it?
Yeah, well, actually, first I'm going to digress into how I got into the pharma world in the first place, which is a bit of an unusual twist. So I began in the pharma world back in the mid 90s. I helped to restart the operations of a pharmaceutical company based in Vietnam. So not in big pharma, in kind of bootstrap pharma mode from my first days in the sector. So the company had been founded in the 50s. In 75, when it was nationalized, it was the largest pharma concern in the country. The so it was shut down in 75, nationalized. 20 years later, the government came back to the owners of the company and said, "Hey, sorry about taking your company away from you 20 years ago. We'd like you to come back and help rebuild the healthcare sector in the country." And I was connected to the family. My wife is one of the daughters in that family. Uh, so at the time I was working at the World Bank, IFC, working on factory projects in developing countries. So I had an expertise in place that allowed me to work well with this. And so ultimately we began by contract manufacturing for several years to produce products that allowed us to restart sales and marketing operations. And then ultimately we shifted gears and built a 200,000 square foot factory just north of Saigon. So
That's a
that
fascinating
was
story. That's amazing. To hear, when you think about 75 and what happened then and, all that 20 years, you can see why it took 20 years to get you back. But no, that's fantastic. So that's where you got your start. I love it. So let's talk a little bit more about that, using that experience to help out with other startups and kind of getting them off the ground. How did that help you right now for this particular startup?
Yeah, well, the most important quality that an entrepreneur can have when someone starting a new business is you have to be tenacious. And when you're building something from scratch, you have to figure out how the pieces to go together. But the truth is, they're never going to fit together the way it's planned out in your mind. You're always going to have to move from plan A to plan B to plan C. You always have to have backups in place and be ready to persevere.
As a company owner, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I think every day I still worry about how to get to the next payroll, and how to do this, how to do that, and where's the next wave of technology going to bring me in, and what we're going to do to solve that or work with that. So it's interesting. What are some of the pitfalls that you think you've run into over your experience and what you try to avoid with this startup?
Yeah, yeah, well, it's related to tenacity, and I'd say it's not being. Don't let yourself get sidetracked by if you have an issue, if you have a problem, don't get sidetracked by it. Take a step back, diagnose where you are, develop a new roadmap forward, and iterate quickly. Don't get caught in overthinking things. Take a step back, realize where you are, evaluate your options to move forward, and then move forward quickly with that. Because it's the the key to life in a biotech startup is very simple, and that the simple key to survival is you have to stay alive, live another day to be able to move things forward. So if it's a fundraising issue, if it's a regulatory issue, if it's a whatever the issue is, you have to find a way to quickly iterate around any problems that arise and and then move forward. It's tenacity. Don't get distracted. Find a way forward and keep moving because the startup world is like riding a bicycle. If you stop, you fall over. You got to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I hear you. One of one of the things that tenacity that you really need is that it seems like you're always raising money, right? How tough is the climate today for raising money? And what are some of the characteristics of success from raising raising money round?
Yeah, well, raising money in the biotech world has been very difficult the last two plus years. So it's yeah, it's difficult. But what you need to do to be successful is there's it's very much a numbers game. You need to contact dozens of people, 100 plus contacts to get 1, 2, 3 follow on. So it's a numbers game and that you have to be persistent there, but it's also a depth game. Just simply because an investor says no, the truth and the key is no is never no for all time. No is very, very often not right now. So what you need to do is not be discouraged, continue conversations, and that's very much that's the kind of thing that will make an investor comfortable that you're someone who's able to persist, someone who will be there and move things forward. So that we're back once again to tenacity. Just because an investor says no, continue the conversation, and 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 I would say be a good member of the community. So, Keith, we met at a biotech and beers group, and that night, the two of us had conversations with a dozen different people. Since then, both of us have done the right thing. We've reached out to people. We've made connections. Made connections, open doors for people, and that's part of being a good member of the community is opening doors for people, helping people when you can, and in return, in return, that it happens to come back to you. So
Absolutely. And you and I were talking a little bit earlier about a woman that I did an earlier podcast with, Shelly Amster. Shelly is one of those people that's a huge connector, and she can connect up everybody. The fact that you're in women's health and she's in women's health, you know, is a great thing. So I talk with her all the time about different things, where she is and who she's introducing other people to. So, connections are huge. That tenacity aspect, when I think about tenacity, I think about the fact that, I'm still our number one salesman, even though after 30 years of doing this stuff, just because I've lived it for so long. So you can talk about it, and you can be able to really kind of let people know what it is you're trying to do and what you're trying to get across to them as you do it. So that tenacity of no is never really no. I can certainly understand that, because you're always trying to get them to say, well, it's no for a reason. What's that reason? Let's try to figure out what that reason is, and how do we get past that reason? What do we need to do to get it to be a yes? And I think that it's even money raising is, sometimes it just happens that all of a sudden it frees up and people start thinking about it, and they're more willing to talk about that. What's the fastest that you've seen for some of the startups that you've worked with, or seen that you've worked around, the growth aspect of that? That must have been crazy when you did that other company and went from, whatever it was to growing it like crazy, back in Vietnam. Tell me a little bit about that.
yeah, well, I think in terms of growth, in terms of growth, there's always a balance. And I'm gonna digress briefly here. One of the things, and this is back to being a good member of the community and helping others out. Shelly Amsterdam and we connected. She has a company that has an innovative IUD. It's an IUD that's painless on its insertion. And the two of us at different conferences, meetings would team up, and I would pitch her product to other people. She would pitch our therapy to people. So it was kind of that notion of, hey, it's not me selling you on what I have. It's let me tell you about what this other person is doing that has me really excited.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's great. And she does the same thing. I've known her for years, and she does the same thing with me too, and talks with other people about what we can do and how we can help startups. So it's a great place to be, and a great place to be able to talk to other people about
Yeah.
how you put things together and what really works and what doesn't work. I think that when people think about um, this podcast in general, driving the business of science, there's so many pitfalls that I see from a business perspective that scientists don't think about when they're putting things together. So I think your team is pretty lucky to have you there, having had that business experience, the ability to be able to help them get beyond just the science and understand that, hey, we only have a certain amount of time from a patent life. If we don't get going and we don't get that product out on the market, we're losing valuable time, because as soon as it gets off patent life, there's going to be somebody following right behind us that's going to put a generic out there. Sometimes people just don't think about that stuff, and it could be millions of dollars over the life of a drug. So those are
Oh
very
yeah,
important.
tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the key to the biotech and the pharma industry is, what market position do you own? And you own a market position if you have a patent, if you have patents that are, if you have patents. If you don't have patents, then you're just one of, you're in a pool with another, a world of generic competitors, and that's a much different type of business. But yeah, so coming back to your question about speed, and I mean, I think one thing I'd uh, make some observations about is in terms of fundraising, that's something that when you're part of a biotech startup, the answer is you're always fundraising. And even if you've just closed around, so we've raised several $100,000 in seed funding. We're at the but as soon as we raised that, or as we were raising that, we were also thinking, okay, look, once we get beyond the seed stage, we're gonna need enough money. What we're looking for is to run a phase 2 clinical trial. We need to support that. We're going to need, and our planning horizon is roughly a 24 to 30 months in the future. We're going to need 2+ years of money to get us to the next inflection point where we can, at that inflection point, we'll change the value of the company, and then we'll come back for further funding. So funding is not, it's not a, I need this much money and I'm good forever. It's
It's
what do
just a
we,
stepping stone, right?
yeah, and it's a continual process. So it's, if you're a scientist, funding looks like grabbing the golden ring on the merry-go-round. But that's it's simply, the golden ring is simply the starting point.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't think people really understand how expensive it is to create a drug. They all talk about how expensive it is to buy a drug, but they don't realize the amount of effort that goes into getting from just the early stage to that next stage. I mean, you've got to get all the way through all your clinical trials, all the things. I've seen other companies that start up where somebody has sold off a product, or they've got lots of money and they've invested in a management team to come in, and their whole purpose is just to get past the phase 2 clinical trial so that they can sell the product off to somebody else. And they never even thought about going to phase 3 because they didn't want to go through all that level of money raised. So it's great that you guys are thinking about what you have to do beyond this and getting to the next stage. Sometimes they'll find a big partner in a big pharma company that wants to work with them, and they'll fund a lot of that stuff. So it all depends on what therapeutic area you're in, and other people that are trying to be part of that. So I think
Mhm.
it's great to think about different options from that perspective.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a great point you raised, Keith. I was at a Boston Globe Future of Medicine conference this week, and one of the observations, it was more a general audience, and they were talking about GLP-1s coming off pharmaceutical insurance coverage here in the state of Massachusetts, and audience comments were, well, this is, once if it's not covered by insurance, it'll be $500 a month out of pocket. How can pharmaceutical companies be so greedy? And the answer is not that, it's not that pharmaceutical companies are so greedy. It's the whole, I'll call it the biotech world, but the pharma world. To develop a drug, like you said, you have to run it through preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You, there's years before you get the drug to market, and along that way, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, drugs drop out all the time. So you know, a drug candidate or program can fail for tolerability, it can fail for toxicity, it can simply be ineffective, and 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 the world of creating new medicines for humanity, it's not simply that new medicine that you create, then it's expensive today. It's expensive, yeah, today because it's on patent. It'll be expensive during the life of that patent, which generally is kind of a 10-year life. But then beyond that, it becomes something that benefits all of mankind forever forward in the future. So it's there's the successful projects have to subsidize those that fail.
That's right. And if you're that person that suffers from some issue, like in your case, endometriosis, if it solves your problem, that's huge, and um, there's so many things that never see the light of day because they don't have business acumen behind them to help that scientist get it out to market. So I applaud you for getting involved with the team you're involved with and helping to kind of drive this to the next stage. I think it's great. And I hope that, I wish you guys all the success in the world. Good luck with all your fundraising. As we wind down, are there any last words that you want to have for other people out there, entrepreneurs trying to go to market or trying to get out there?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's a global observation that the startup life is hard. You have to pull your belt tight and make it through the lean periods. But I will say for myself, when I wake up every morning, it's, I'm looking forward to succeeding in business, getting our phase 2 trial done, raising the funding for phase 3, getting that done. There's those business goals, and everybody is looking to succeed in a business setting, but there's an overarching return and payback here, which is when we succeed, there's 7 million women right now who have no real recourse. When we succeed, when we succeed, we're going to lower pain, we're going to slow the progress of endometriosis. We're looking, based on what we're looking at, we believe that we can help 9 out of 10 women with endometriosis. So it's that intangible benefit of helping people, freeing people from pain, freeing people from just the morbidity of suffering from a disease, and that's part of the great side benefit that you at Court Square Group and all of us involved in the biotech community are looking at. What we're doing is going to improve lives, and that's, we don't do this just for the paycheck. We're doing this as well to make a better world, leave a better world for our kids.
I couldn't have said it better, and I think you're absolutely right, Mark. I think about that, and I talk to my people every day about, we're not going to be the ones developing the drug, but we're going to help them to get it to the market faster. And to me, that's a huge benefit. The faster we can get things out to the market so that they can be satisfying and helping patients, the better we all can be. Again, thank you very much, Mark. This has been the Driving the Business of Science podcast with Mark Connell, co-founder of SLBST. Thank you very much, Mark. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Keith, many thanks. Appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.